Well, hello everybody, and hi Jack. It's really good to have you dropping by here in Eugene, Oregon. Now we're sitting here in the middle of April of 2019, and I guess it was last fall was the last time you were traveling through and described us your project for the farm there in Oklahoma that you're starting up.
Yeah, I think so. That's about right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the progress report or anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, Todd, I have always had a strong empathy for the homeless because when I first came to Seattle in 1960, my car broke down in Centralia and it cleaned me out of all the cash I had except $26. We drove on into Seattle and it was late at night, so I got a $4 hotel in Renton for my wife to stay in, and I slept in the car. I thought I was in Seattle, but I found out I was in Renton. So the next day, I drive on in to Seattle, and I stop in for a coffee at a place, and I see a newspaper, and I look at the ads, and I find that someone had a house to rent in North Seattle. So we drove out and got acquainted with them, and I was very fortunate because these people were from the same place, same state as I was, Oklahoma. And I talked them into agreeing to renting me the place as a little small house on the come. I would pay them the rent as soon as I found a job. And, well, it took me 3 months. But I did finally get a job, and the bad thing about it, I already had a job lined up in Seattle with a stockbroker who was going to pay me $100 a month draw for a couple of 3 months till I got on my feet. Well, I went in and found out that the guy's license had been suspended the day before. So here I am in Seattle with $26 to my name, and my wife, likes to eat, same as me. But anyway, the nearest friend was probably 2,000 miles away. So I took my little old Admiral TV down to a hock shop, and he offered me $10, but I negotiated him up for $20. So we peanut butter and crackers and looking for a job, and that's the way I spent the next 3 months. And when I finally found it, so that's why I feel a strong empathy for the homeless, someone who doesn't have a place to go to the restroom, doesn't have food, nor a place to sleep at night. And I started writing a novel called Wayfarers, where a group of homeless people down in the Pioneer Square used to have, before they gentrified it, Pioneer Square used to be the hangout for poor people. And this group of people decided that they're going to do something for the homeless. And the Wayfarers was actually the name of a restaurant that they kind of gathered at. So anyway, this is what, in writing this novel and the adventures and so forth, that's what I got to thinking about it. Why not turn fiction into reality? So I organized Glenn K. Evans Farm and became a 501c3. I did all of it myself. And I would love to have started one of these original farms right here in the West Coast, either Seattle or Olympia or even Eugene. But land costs around that area are $5,000 or $10,000 an acre. Well, my hometown in Wewoka, Oklahoma, 60 miles from Oklahoma City in central Oklahoma, I found land I could buy for. I bought 30 acres for $1,100 an acre, 2 miles south of town, so it was perfect. So we've already got our land tied up. I did it all on credit, using my own personal credit and carrying the cost. And I've made 2 grant applications to try to get some money to help it. But we have moved 2 trailer houses onto the property, and I've made arrangements for 2 solar power systems for each trailer, because I found out if I use the public utilities, it's going to cost me about $300 a month for both of them, and that's $4,000 a year. So I got these little solar units for about $1,000 each. So therefore, for $2,000, I'll pay it out in 5-6 months or so. So I'm heading back to Oklahoma now again. I'm going to spend about 3 months on the farm, and probably I've got an old-fashioned scythe, and I'll be cutting weeds and try it before they go to seed, and hopefully cover it with some clover. because it enriches the soil, and we believe in no-till, self-sustained farming. And that's what we're creating, because this 30 acres, I figure within time, I can take care of anywhere from 20 to 30 people who can make a living. And my feeling is very strongly that if someone's, it doesn't have to be homeless, but if they want to learn no-till, self-sustained farming, this is the place. And we will also train local people, that want to learn how to farm and become self-sufficient. And my feeling is very strongly that every community should be able to feed itself. And if I can create a farm where I can train people to make a living and also raise more money and acquire more land and make, say, 3 to 5, maybe 10 acres at most for a family to go out on their own once they're trained as to how to grow things. And we'll get some freeze-dry equipment so that you can preserve this food and it'll last anywhere 10 or 15 years. So my feeling is you first of all feed yourself. And then what you don't need, you try to sell. And what you don't sell, you give to the local community, the food banks, and anyone that happens to need some money. Now, once we get this going to build goodwill, we'll probably, if we raise a lot of watermelons, we'll probably have a watermelon fest in the park for everybody in town. Come and get acquainted with everyone. So that's basically what I have in mind, and I'm heading back to Oklahoma right now. I've got to search the possibility of drilling a well because we've arranged for electricity, but there's an oil well pumping on the property which we don't own, and with this fracking, if they spoil the water, we'll have to use municipal rural water, which is expensive because they got to drill under the freeway, and that's going to cost $5,000. But when I talk to the neighbors, if their water's good, then we'll arrange to drill a well so we've got water. And I've already arranged for a local nursery to plant 18 fruit trees. That's 3 each for about 6 different fruits. So I figure we'll get some fruit growing and we can preserve it and use it ourselves and sell what we can and give away what we don't need. And this basically is what we're going to do. Now, I envision this is just a start. I'm somewhat of an optimist. So I call it Glenn K. Evans Farms. So we want to make this a show place where people can see how it can be done, and hopefully other people will copy us. We'll share our ideas with anyone that is interested, because we're not in competition with anyone. I feel that every small, especially our small towns. Now, when I grew up there in Wewoka, Oklahoma, during the Depression days, I was born in 1930, the town had 10,000 population. And there were many, many small farmers that were able to grow, but most of them spent their time raising peanuts and cotton. Now, my dad was a sharecropper, and he worked about 120 acres, and he spent all his time raising peanuts and cotton. And when it came time to sell it, sometimes he was lucky to get his seed money back, or the seed money back for the landowner. But yet my mother, a little tiny 1/4-acre garden, she fed us. I mean, she grew vegetables, and of course we had a little orchard, and she canned all this stuff, and she fed us all winter from that little 1/4 acre. So you don't need a whole lot of land to feed people if you don't raise a lot of, cattle, livestock. I mean, you feed all this grain to cows, or horses, and if you feed, in other words, you feed your grain to people. We'll plan on growing maybe an acre or 2 of wheat so we can make our own bread, and we'll have our vegetables and we'll have our fruits. And this, I think that and if we can do this, set an example and make a showplace out of it, and get this going in every small rural community which have been declining. They're losing population. People want to move to the city so they can get city services. Well, if we can create these people and make them self-sustaining, where they raise their own food, you got shelter, food, and as long as you're not a slave, that's freedom, real freedom. People have always been congregating to the cities, but let's rebuild rural America and cut down these cities, because all these big buildings in the downtown, it's mostly clerical people and people that don't really do anything. They don't manufacture anything. They don't grow any food. They don't can any food. So let's build our country a country of producers again, and that's kind of my theory. And I'm 88 years old. It's kind of my last hoorah. I initially wanted to be a writer in my early days, but I had a rich uncle. And when I was in high school, he says, "Jack, what do you want to be?" And I says, "Well, I want to be a great rich writer." He says, "Well, if you want to get rich, you go where the money is." So I decided to keep my writing as a hobby and pursue the activity of a stockbroker. It was tough because I didn't have a client, but I finally got in to be a stockbroker. I worked for other firms, worked up to vice president, three of them, and finally started my own firm. And the people said, because I wanted to raise money for local businesses and create markets in their stock and help build industry in our own local community. And my peers in the business, they said, "Jack, you'll starve to death. You'll never be able to make a living just dealing in local stocks." Well, it was tough. I mean, I started out as a one-man shop, did everything, kept the books and did the selling and everything. And it was tough to get anyone to join me. And I went through maybe 2 sets of stockbrokers before I found somebody that would have faith in me. So I had a retired lieutenant colonel, Bill Ridling, that used to be the base commander in Drew Air Base in Paris. And he says, "Jack, I'm retired now, and I like what you're doing." And he joined me, and he had one of his friends come in. And from there, we grew from one little single one-man office to 3 offices and 40 brokers, bringing in anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000 a month, which I owned the company, so I got a half of it. So I was a high flyer until I finally, met my end, as we always do. The things that make you a success also cause your failure. Well, I was a plunger. I took risks, and I solved it most of the time. I could do it, but one time I didn't. So I finally said, "To hell with it. I'm going to go back and do what I want to do and be a writer." Since then, I've written 3 novels and working on the 4th, The Last Lumber Baron, and probably 6 or 7 histories and 6 or 7 poetry books and tons of political essays and many short stories, which I'm going to put into books. So, but at 88, I'm going back. This is my last hoorah. If I can get this going, I may not see it to full fruition, but if I can get it going, I've got 5 directors. One of them is a Native American. He inspired the character Chief in my Wayfarers book. And I've got Bernie Meyer, who is known as the American Gandhi. He's internationally famous. In fact, the Prime Minister of India invited him over to help plan the 150th anniversary of Gandhi's birth. Well, he's a director. And then I went back to Oklahoma, and a good friend of mine suggested I go in and see the banker. It's the largest bank in here. They have 3 branches. And he said, Brian Kane, so he suggested I go in to meet him. So I went in, and when I sat down, Brian says, "I know you." And I didn't realize it, but I had been to the 100th anniversary of my Boy Scout troop number 26 then. Now it's 426. And he says, "Yeah, I chatted with you at the Boy Scout anniversary." And, I talked to him, and he didn't say he was a banker, and I didn't know he was the biggest banker in the area. So anyway, I had a nice chat with him, and he said, "Well, Jack, I don't make loans anymore, but I'll have to introduce you to a loan officer." And then so he set me up to finance the land. And then a year later, I went back to Wewoka, and I says, "I'm looking for 2 local directors here in Wewoka. Do you have any ideas?" And he says, "Well, Jack, I'd do it myself, but I have so many commitments I couldn't do you justice. But I have a young loan officer that's into organic farming. Let's go back and talk to him." He was wildly enthusiastic about what we're doing. And he says, "My father-in-law, he's a pharmacist over in Seminole, and he's into organic farming, and he might want to join us." Well, both of them did. So I have a local director, a local input. When I was last back there, I went in and met the mayor, which is a lady, beautiful lady. She's the daughter of one of my classmates back in 1949 at high school. And she's very supportive of what we're doing. And I met Dennis, the head of the Wewoka Industrial Commission. And he's the one that referred me to the nursery that's planting the trees. And so we're trying to build support locally, and I think that we've got a lot of support there. And to me, this first farm is just a start. I saw a nice article in one of the, I think it was the Nation magazine or one of them, on the president of the Ford Foundation. So I wrote him a nice letter. He had a terrible background too, and I says, you almost seem like a soulmate, and told him what we're doing, and he even answered my letter. He came back and said, Jack, I wish you a whole lot of luck in what you're doing. It sounds great. So, later on I'll probably apply to Ford, but I think we need to get down the road a bit, and because I can use any kind of donation that I can get, because we're going to make it happen. I can do it myself, poor boying it, but it takes longer, and I want to get this moving because this is a movement. Let's get back to rebuilding our local rural communities where people can have a nice life and have their food and shelter. And if you got food and shelter and a brain, that's about all you really need. I mean, I was shooting in the broker's business. I was shooting for 10 million. I got it up to about 3 million, and it all went away. And I found out that all you really need in this life is food, shelter, and love. If you got that, and a brain, you can go from there. And so that's kind of my feeling. Do you have any questions, Scott, Todd?
No, that's very complete story there of the state of the farm at this point in time, and so you'll be back there for the
early July,
right? Yeah. Through the spring and into the hot part of the summer.
Yeah, I plan on spending about 2 or 3 months back in Oklahoma at the farm, and then 2 or 3 months out here. Because I love Washington, so I'm just going to be my residence. But I'll go back there, what I really need to do is find a real good ramrod that I can trust, because we've done a mission statement, and I don't want new people coming in and changing what we're trying to do. I mean, so many organizations start, and the founder does a beautiful job, and when he goes, people get their self-interest, and they're looking for taking care of themselves rather than taking care of the people. But this Glenn K. Evans Farms Inc. is in the business of helping people. I mean, I don't care. We're not trying to make money. I'm trying to take care of people. And if I can get where we need very little cash. And, the only cash we need really after we get going and producing stuff and feeding ourselves is to buy more land and make it available in small tracts for a family to live on and produce food for the local community and themselves. And that's what I'm shooting for. Mm-hmm. And with a mission statement and a corporate charter that has the bylaws of what we're doing, and we have 5 directors now, and that's close enough. And in fact, we had our last annual meeting. We had 3 of them out here, and there was one of the directors in Oklahoma. So I used my cell phone, turned on the speaker, and he was able to participate. So that worked out beautifully.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And I really appreciate, Todd. I think you do a wonderful job. I see all these interviews that you do with people, and you put it, you crystallize it and can it for people in the future generations to see. And I think you're leaving quite a legacy.
Yeah, it's nice to know that after you're dead that there'll be some way for somebody to find you on Google.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm also a poet, and we did this Poets West, and my wife, she died this last October 27th, one day after our 50th anniversary. And I got to give her credit, Barbara Evans. She's the one that did this Poets West. I mean, she did the editing, and she selected the music, and she arranged it, and I was just a little piece of meat that stood up there and talked, the host. But we've done about 300 programs, 30-minute programs, and it's syndicated nationally over Pacifica Autoport down in Berkeley, California. So this is a legacy that she left. And I think it's wonderful that we purposely did these programs so they would not get dated. And I enjoy looking at stuff we did 10 years ago, and it's just like, it was yesterday. And that's kind of what you do. Of course, here's a lot of political stuff which changes, but it's good history.
Well, yeah, the Poets West radio shows are all local poets and standing up in the open mic environments, cafes, and poetry readings. authors, and so that's how I actually met you and spent most of my time when I lived in Seattle. Of course, we met in the anti-war movement against the Iraq War. That's where we meet at the anti-war protest. And at that time, who was that fellow who was Poets Against War?
Oh, that Sam Hamill.
Sam Hamill.
Great guy,
yeah,
great guy.
And that really got through to me. And this is his poetry really got my attention. And so we did succeed in filming him at one point.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on the channel.
It's on your YouTubes, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
And I've always had a strong empathy for the Native Americans. And in fact, I knew the chief or chairman of the Duwamish tribe there in Seattle. They had to buy their own longhouse because there was a time our patriotic citizens in the past chased every Duwamish Indian out of Seattle. They could not live there. The only one they tolerated was Princess Angeline, who was a daughter of Chief Seattle. And in fact, a couple of boring brats pushed him off the sidewalk one time. Here's a chief that let him in there. And so anyway, I called up this chairman, and I says, on Columbus Day, why don't we celebrate in Native First American Day? And she thought it was a beautiful idea. And I invited Shama Sawant, who was the first socialist to get to be on the city council of Seattle in 100 years, and she came out and spoke. I don't think she was even running for the council at that time. But anyway, I gathered a bunch of Indian poets that I knew and other poets, and they all came out, and we celebrated Indigenous people, our First American Day.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you recorded it, and it's on the YouTube of Poets West.
And it has one of your directors, Thomas Hubbard, is one of the directors of the Glenn K. Evans Farm, and his monologue is absolutely memorable. I think it wasn't actually the best part of his talk. Wasn't a monologue, but
the Hey Columbus.
Yeah, it was the Hey Columbus. That's right.
Yeah, that was the name of it.
We should put a clip of that right in here with this interview. But so that was the typical of the kind of events that Jack was organizing in those days when he lived in Seattle before he was gentrified out of the.
Well, I was chased out by the rent-hogs. I'd lived in a place, a high-rise, for $1,700 for $1,400 a month, and new people bought it. Says you got to be out in 6 months, and if you want to come back at the remodel, your rent doubles. So I moved to Olympia, Washington, and for probably $400 less than what I had been paying.
How many people were gentrified, or let's say they were displaced out of this because of a buyout of their rental home that they've been living in for 20 years? In fact, the renters paid the mortgage. The renters are the ones who paid off the mortgage on this beautiful apartment building.
Yeah, there's about 200 apartments in it, so you had 200 families in it, and the people who built it, when I moved in there in 1987, I think it was, they were beautiful people. They built it, they financed it with government money for the World's Fair. Probably, I don't know how much it cost them, probably about $6 million. And when the old lady died, that was our neighbor, she considered these people who rented her neighbors, and she treated them well. Well, she died, and then the kids couldn't wait. Somebody offered them $76 million, I think, and they took it and ran.
I can't blame them, but that's a lot of money.
Oh yeah, but all these people had to leave, and
it's the system. The system is what's causing all this grief.
Oh yeah, and this inequality that we have developed is just unfathomable. I mean, I think, by golly, I think that a good time to equalize this is at change of generation. If anybody leaves more than $10 million to one person or institution, tax it 90% and bring it 99% and bring it back into the common good.
Absolutely.
We need to rebuild our commons. That's what I'm trying to do with my Glenn K. Evans Farm, is create a place where people who don't have a place to stay, they got a place for food and shelter, and to try to rebuild their lives.
The English property system, the land system that we've inherited since 1787, and it's encoded in the Constitution. It places absolute ownership of land into the hands of individuals. And of course, it doesn't take very long before the smartest and most aggressive individuals have more than their share of the land. And so America is turning into an aristocracy. It's quite predictable because of the design of the system.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel very strongly that resources of this earth are here for all life, not just humans. Even, the squirrels, the insects. Insects are a feed. They help the food chain up the level. So I think that we need something that's going to, and we need to cut out war. I mean, war is the most ridiculous thing that you can have. When you think of the resources that go into war, think what you could do for your citizens. And I believe that people should be free to use their own creativity and personal initiative to do things. And I think our capitalistic system worked fine until where the local merchants took care of the people, and they were neighbors, and they didn't get too far out of line because people go across the street. But this big mega corporations, they're destroying capitalism with their greed.
And you mentioned the word creativity. The United States hasn't demonstrated any creativity whatsoever in looking at its political system, which are the fundamental arrangements for our human organization since 1787. The settlers who came here eagerly spread all the way across the continent, and they set up 3,004 counties to register their land titles, and they ran out and claimed the land and divided it up into ownership squares, and they went down and they stuffed their papers into the title registries in the 3,004 county courthouses, and then they built the county jail right next to that, just so that they could force the land system. And it doesn't have to be this way. There's other ways for human beings to organize our who's going to be able to live in what locations. In fact, when I lived in Japan, they have quite a different history of land allocation. And the way it has evolved up to this point in time is that renters accumulate equity shares when they rent for long periods of time. And in fact, one of my friends in Setagaya-ku outside of Tokyo, he was a renter for over 25 years. And it was a house which, of course, escalated in value, and they had a spectacular land bubble. And when the house was sold, he received something close to $1 million of a payout because of the fact that he'd been renting there, and he was entitled to stay there.
Well, he paid for the bloody thing.
But you get the right of tenancy to stay on a place once you've lived there for that period of time. And so, as far as I know, he's still living on Bainbridge Island and having a good life on his squatting in that apartment or a rental house.
Oh yeah.
But this shows what a different mentality that was accepted by the popular democracy in Japan, and a system like that gives rights to tenants is unimaginable in the United States. So it's unthinkable because it's an idea that's so unfamiliar that people don't have the creative ability to imagine.
Well, I think, we need to learn from other people. And I think that every city, every county, every state, and even our national should own some land that's commons. And I mean commons where people can go there and live and scratch out a living if they have to. So much of the land that's owned by a county or a state, it's got no trespassing. Even the citizens can't use it, and I think that's wrong. Mm-hmm. Why should I have to, if I'm homeless, I come to a town and I can't afford to pay well, in Seattle it's $200 or $300 a night, I think, for a motel or hotel. Well, who can tolerate that? Mm-hmm. And they arrest you. Where you going to go take a leak? It's impossible.
As soon as you have a commons, people, even if you just had a tent city of homeless people, they still have to have some common agreement of that you can't come in my tent anytime you want, and so there's still, even in tribal societies, there's always some reasonable.
You respect personal.
It's an arrangement, that would be something more than a simple commons.
Oh yeah,
but those are relatively easy to imagine. and they are in fact worked out in every homeless encampment, even if it's just a hobo jungle. It doesn't take very long for people to sort
It's an
out
understanding
how to live together without having everybody owning it and paying money and we're up to $10,000 an acre outside of town, and it's over $100,000 for a residential lot.
Sure.
In Eugene now, so we're toast.
Oh yeah, who can afford it? Especially, what I have is strong empathy also for the young people of this country. Now, when I went to college back in 1956 or so, I was able to work in the summer at a lumber mill up in Oregon and make enough money to help get me through, plus a little part-time job, and able to work my way through college. And when I got out of college, I didn't owe anyone. I got a bachelor's degree, and look what's happening to the young folks today. I mean, I think we should have free college education, and if the kid can earn his living, you can at least take care of that. But getting the education, I think, is a responsibility of us who are out in the working community and pay our taxes and take care of it. We had it, and we owe it to the future generations.
Well, now the university gets less than 10% of its funding from the taxpayer, and it's essentially been forced to convert itself into a corporation that needs to get revenue in order to continue to exist.
Oh yeah,
and it's not their fault of the regents or the governors of the university that now that they have to go on bended knee to corporate donors and to high wealth alumni, who then these wealthy people only build the colleges that they like, and so you have a great big science and technology buildings and great big sports buildings, sports arenas, because this is what the rich donors seem to prefer, and you have a giant business school.
Yeah.
And so these are the biggest buildings since I left. I graduated from the University of Oregon in 1978. Well, I came back here 40 years later, and I thought that I was in Back to the Future, where Biff still had the sports almanac, and so we're still living in the Biff timeline here. Because every place I look in the university is big statues of Biff,
Well, when I was going to college, they used to say, well, you don't need all this liberal arts. You need to learn how to make a living. And yet, J. Paul Getty was one of the wealthiest men in the world for a while. And he says, well, give me a liberal arts trained person and I'll teach him the business, because liberal arts teaches you to think and how to live, and we need to get back to that.
Well, when I went to college in 1978, it really was no better. I took accounting because like you, I had been homeless. I'd lived in my truck for some years, and I won't even tell you all the hardships and problems that I had because of drugs and alcohol. But I went to the university just to get an accounting degree to make money.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to any building except I had never even went inside the library. I didn't even know what was inside the other buildings. I didn't learn anything about liberal arts. And that accounting department was nothing better than a CPA exam cram school. And their single-minded goal was to have a high percentage of their graduates passing the CPA exam, because that was the way to be a successful business college. And so consequently, everyone who graduated, there wasn't any jobs for hundreds of CPAs, and almost all of them either ended up working at Starbucks or in basically clerical positions for the government and whatnot, because they had an accounting degree.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't an idyllic past. We were already just on the cusp of the Reagan era. Mm-hmm. So I was going to college during the Carter era. Of course, you were going to college during the Truman era.
Korean. Yeah. Well, it's you need a degree to a certain extent so that you have people who are qualified. But I don't think the degree should be a locked door. I mean, there's people with ability who they shouldn't be held back just because they don't have a degree. I mean, how would poor old Lincoln, he wouldn't have a chance today because he didn't have a degree. And yet, look, some of the greatest people come up from, you might say, the dredges and the swamps, and they create something and give something to society. So you don't want to close the door on this other ability, self-trained people. I think that you shouldn't hold it against them because they didn't get a degree.
Well, they're the best people.
The corporations are the ones that did this. You know, it's a gate. You got the gatekeeper. You got to have the degree, or you can't get in.
Yeah, so it is a complicated world, and I'm glad we have trained medical professionals.
Yeah.
And it takes more than a 4-year high school education. It takes a college education. So I really believe in higher education.
Oh, yeah.
But that being said, the content that's being taught in the university has never been in my lifetime for the good of the student. It's been for the good of the customers of the university, which
corporations.
are the corporations, and basically the corporation is really just the public-facing facade of the wealthy.
Yeah.
So the super wealthy who own the corporations and who guide not only the policies of their businesses but also the government from behind the scenes by means such as buying the universities, buying the content and telling the university what to teach, buying our local newspaper. They've bought all the broadcast television and radio stations are owned by out-of-town national chains. This is how the wealthy control everything. They control everything that we think about because it's in our face 24/7 is the content that they teach us.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I think we really have to get back to nature. I mean, we set out to conquer nature, but we're a part of nature. And that's why this Glenn K. Evans farm idea is getting back to raising food and creating your shelter and taking care of the local community. And I think we've got to do this. And like all these borders, you know, they stop people at the border. Well, the money seems to go wherever it wants to. The corporations can go wherever they want to. I think most people are going to stay home. They prefer to be among their own kind, but sometimes you should be free to wander. I mean, look at the United States. We have 50 states, and I can pick up and move to any state I want to without having to get a passport or ask somebody, can I do it? I just do it. Now, why can't we create a world like that?
And the on the farm there, is it dark at night? Is the star? Because in the city, when you go out at night, the sky is lit up from all the lights.
Oh yeah, I grew up in a small town, and I'd almost forgotten what it was. But I went back to visit my dad one time, and I tell you, I saw this panorama of stars. It was an orchestra, and I was so enthusiastic. I had remembered when as a kid, I got laid on top of my car hood and looked at the sea for 2 hours. It was so magnificent, and people in the city never see that.
Is it still dark at night there in Wewoka at the farm?
Oh yeah, I can get back to that.
And the air quality.
Good clean air.
Where's the nearest pollution sources for air pollution?
Probably Oklahoma City.
Well, that's 120 miles away.
60 miles away, yeah.
So that will be whoever lives there will have the peace and quietude and natural environment.
Well, I hope I could train these people and they can go out and help start these things in other areas. I mean, I think every community should have, should be able to feed itself. I mean, why should I buy oranges from China when they grow in California or down in the Gulf Coast? And to me, it's transportation costs, and we need the big corporations. They're killing our land with pesticides and fertilizers and stuff like that. And if you can let nature do its work, you can rebuild the soil. And that's what we want to do: is start rebuilding, start a movement, rebuilding our food, our soil, so that we can grow food for people, good food that they need, not all this canned stuff.
Now, I think that'll be a good point to stop off, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.